Right, Mitch McConnell was on this week with George Stephanopoulos, and he was also on, I believe, Meet the Press. And I'm going to show both clips of McConnell basically voicing his thoughts on President Obama being able to nominate a person for justice on the Supreme Court.
George. Let's bring in now the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell. Senator McConnell, thank you for joining us this morning as well. You just heard Dennis McDonough right there saying, quoting you from your op-ed after the president was elected, saying the Senate's going to get back to work. He thinks the Senate should get to work and provide a hearing and a vote for Judge Garland. Any chance that's going to happen this year?
Well, the Senate has been very much at work for the last 15 months. We've passed a lot of legislation that the President has signed, and the President, Chief of Staff knows we're very much at work. Look, the way Supreme Court justices have been handled in presidential election years is very clear. It's been 80 years since a vacancy created in a presidential election year was filled. You have to go back to 1888. Grover Cleveland was in the White House to find the last time a vacancy created in a presidential year on the Supreme Court was confirmed by a Senate controlled by the party different from the president. So we know what the tradition is. Joe Biden in 1992, and he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, laid down the Biden rule. He said,
okay, that was a hypothetical. That never even occurred. It was what Biden said hypothetically.
The campaign is underway. No Supreme Court judge would be confirmed. In 2005, Harry Reid said under the Constitution, the Senate doesn't even have an obligation to give a vote to a nominee. And Chuck Schumer, who will be the Democratic leader next year, said 18 months before the 2008 election, the Democratic Senate would not confirm a Supreme Court vacancy.
Okay, so now let's just go back. He is partially correct in those two instances, except that even though each of the Republican nominees got hearings, and when they could not even come out of committee, they couldn't get enough votes to come out of committee, Harry Reid brought their nominations to the floor for a vote anyway. So that's the difference.
Well, the tradition has been, in a presidential election year, that the next president, after the American people have weighed in, gets to make the decision.
Well, there haven't been that many examples, but you're saying clearly there will be no hearing, no vote for Judge Garland this year?
That's right. Yeah, the principle is look, George, the American people are in the middle of choosing who the next president is going to be. And that next president ought to have this appointment, which will affect the Supreme Court for probably a quarter of a century.
But they elect.
Okay, and the problem with that is you elect a president for 4 years, not 3, and basically what you're saying is the president shouldn't act or utilize any presidential powers in the final year of his presidency, which doesn't hold water.
President Obama.
But the last time the American people voted was in 2014, and they elected a Republican Senate. And under the Constitution, we have shared responsibility. This is not something he does alone. He nominates, we confirm. The last time the American people spoke in 2014, they gave us 9 additional net seats, and we took over the U.S. Senate.
One of your Republican senators, Mark Kirk, spoke out on it this week. He said the Senate should vote. Listen.
Just man up and cast a vote. The tough thing about these senatorial jobs is you get yes or no votes. Your whole job is to either say yes or no and explain why.
You confident you're going to hold Republicans together?
Well, look, Mark Kirk is a great senator. He's running this year in Illinois. I'm confident he's going to get reelected. But the schedule in the Senate is set by the majority leader. And most of my members are very comfortable with letting the American people make this decision by electing the next president who will fill this vacancy next year.
Let me move on. On Tuesday, you said you told Donald Trump that he should condemn and discourage violent acts during the campaign.
All right, well, we're going to skip past that. But one thing that Mitch McConnell did tell his members is that if Trump becomes the nominee, they are well within their rights to run against him. Now, I'm going to run a clip from a different morning show just for you to see basically what he said there. Now, here's Mitch McConnell coming up on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd basically going over the same thing with him.
Senator McConnell, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Good morning. Glad to be with you.
I want to start with something you said in 2008 about judicial vacancies. Here it is.
Our Democratic colleagues continually talk about the so-called Thurman rule, under which the Senate supposedly stops confirming judges in a presidential election year. It's a seeming obsession with this rule that doesn't exist. It's just an excuse for our colleagues to run out the clock on qualified nominees who are waiting to fill badly needed vacancies.
Now, Senator McConnell, I started my interview with Harry Reid with a similar quote from him back during the Bush years, too. Essentially, you guys have changed places in your position on Supreme Court vacancies, and it seems to me the only difference is the political party affiliation of the White House.
Well, there was no Supreme Court vacancy in 2008, and that's what we're talking about here, Chuck. You have to go back 80 years to find the last time a vacancy on the Supreme Court created during a presidential election year was filled. You have to go back to Grover Cleveland in 1888 to find the last time a presidential appointment was confirmed by a Senate of the opposite party when the vacancy occurred in a presidential year. We're talking about the Supreme Court here. The election is underway, and what we are using is the Biden rule. In 1992, when Joe Biden was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, he made the point that a vacancy, had it occurred in 1992, would not be filled. Harry Reid, when he was leader in 2005, pointed out the Senate had no obligation under the Constitution to give a nominee a vote. And Chuck Schumer in 2007, 18 months before Bush's term was up, said if a vacancy occurred,
but in each of those occasions, but Senator, in each of those occasions, Republicans at the time criticized those Senate Democrats for having that position. And frankly, that's what we're seeing here. There feels like there's hypocrisy on both sides. Democrats essentially don't want to confirm a Supreme Court justice if a Republican's doing it, and Republicans don't want to confirm a Supreme Court justice if a Democrat is doing it. Isn't that what we're staring at here?
Yeah, nobody's been entirely consistent, so let's just look at the history of it. It hadn't happened in 80 years, and it won't happen this year. The principle involved here, Chuck, when an election's underway, as Joe Biden was talking in 1992, when an election's underway, the American people are about to weigh in on who's going to be the president. And that's the person, whoever that may be, who ought to be making this appointment.
You know, you said something, though, about 3 months ago. You said this. My view is just because there's an election coming up doesn't mean you're not supposed to do anything. You even noted we've had an election every 2 years, right on schedule since 1788. So I guess when does a presidential term run out? When does the president lose his authority to make appointments, in your view?
Oh, well, the Senate has been quite active. I mean, we had a...
Okay, notice he's not going to answer the question.
Incredible year last year. This year, we're going to have another year. We've got a great chance of passing every single appropriation bill for the first time since 1994. The Senate's not doing nothing during this election season. But we're not giving lifetime appointments to this president on the way out the door to change the Supreme Court for the next 25 or 30 years.
Let me get you to respond to a criticism that George Will has that's all over papers today, and you've probably seen it. But he doesn't much care for your strategy here. He writes this, conservative George Will, the Republican Party's incoherent response to the Supreme Court vacancy is a partisan reflex in search of a justifying principle. The multiplicity of Republican rationalizations for their refusal to even consider Merrick v. Garland radiates insincerity. What do you say to George Will?
Well, I just disagree with him. I think when you've got a nominee that MoveOn.org is extremely enthusiastic about, and multiple articles pointing out that if Judge Merrick were in fact confirmed, he would move the court dramatically to the left. I just disagree with George Will. I don't think it's a good idea to move the court to the left. But that's not really the issue here. It's not the person, it's the principle. Who ought to make this lifetime appointment? It's the next president, not this one.
Are you completely ruling out a lame duck scenario if Hillary Clinton wins the November election?
Yes. We're not going to be confirming a judge to the Supreme Court under this.
Even if it means Hillary Clinton nominates somebody even more liberal than Merrick Garland.
Well, it's my hope. It'd be hard to be more liberal than Merrick Garland.
And that's a completely disingenuous statement, because Merrick Garland is one of the most moderate choices for the Supreme Court, and even guys on his side of the aisle basically are praising this guy as being a moderate, which translation means there's no sure vote one way or the other from this guy. He could go progressive, and he could also go conservative, and it would be extremely difficult to tell which way this guy would lean. So again, Mitch McConnell is being a bit of an asshole, calling this guy, an ultra liberal.
It's my hope that that she will not be making the appointment.
Let me ask you about who could be facing her in the fall. Are you comfortable with Donald Trump as your party's standard bearer?
Well, I'm going to support the nominee. I've got an obligation to my colleagues and to my party to support the nominee, and I fully intend to do that.
But what did you mean when you told them privately you could drop him like a hot rock? Do you think it's appropriate for any of your Republican senators to run against him if necessary?
Well, I think we've got a bunch of Senate races in purple states that are very competitive, and each of those races will be crafted very differently to try to appeal to the people in New Hampshire or Pennsylvania or Ohio, Wisconsin, Nevada, Colorado, Illinois. Every one of those races are going to be individual standalone contests with people who we think have a great chance of winning in November.
And if that means running away from Donald Trump, that should be their strategy?
Well, I think every campaign will have a different strategy to appeal to different kinds of voters that we have in different parts of the country.
Are you going, and one other final thing, Donald Trump is having a meeting with various...
Yeah, and that just goes to show you a politician's a politician. He claims he's supporting the nominee, but at the same time, he's telling the senators underneath him that they can cut and run anytime they need to. So anyway, I just added that last little bit to show you the hypocrisy of these guys.